All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and start to share my desktop. Okay, share my screen out. All right, very good. Get a few of these things kind of moved around here. I know some people might still be joining the session while we are beginning here and we're in progress. So I'm going to ask everybody if you would just please self-mute your phones again. That would be helpful. Otherwise, it's hard for me to go through and find everybody and mute everybody. So when you log in, if you could just self-mute the phone, that would I would appreciate that. It seems like when I'm not in the sharing screen, I'm able to go ahead and mute you guys, but once I start to share, it's a long process going through the directory list. So, and then I want to give everybody a little bit of an update as well. When it comes to the recordings from yesterday, okay, it took WebEx quite some time to process those files. I got to get them a look over and then send them out to you guys. I'm going to forward those. So it may very well be that I'm going to be, in some cases, if the quality isn't the best, I might wind up re-recording it solo, but to include the same content, and then at least be able to share that out. So just if you could be patient, I'm going to try to get those things done this week and get that shared out and see how that goes. And then also with the documentation, I've got everyone trying to pull everybody's email address so I can send out the documentation that we've been talking about. For the most part, the documentation is in our website. Once you log into Mionix, under Mionix tab here in the upper right corner, you'll see documentation. And you do need a Mionix account to log in here, but it's not a painful thing to do, a painful process. All you're having to do is just make up a login for that, and then they want your name and email address and company information and so forth. And then you're going to be able to get into the Mionix part of it. So any of these types of files that you might be interested in, you're able to select and go ahead and download. So I'm just going to the second page here. So I know we might be having like a little bit of some slowdown going on too with our internet and everything, but here how to create a quick set. If you click on download, it opens the file, and then this document is pretty much some of the things I'm going to be sharing out to you guys, but you can also download it here. So, and then this talks about all the different conditions for the quick set. So and you can always go over here and do the download button in the upper right corner. So I just want to kind of point that out to you guys. You have that as an option to go back into here and look at other documentation. Maybe that's not so much the information I'm going to be sharing out with you, but other documentation that might be relevant too. Okay. So again, if you guys wouldn't mind, appreciate you guys using the chat field if you've got questions. I'm trying to keep an eye on that along with going into my topics. So, all right, so let's begin. We're going to start by talking about our cut server information. So when we go to prepare files for contour cutting, okay, we, in some cases, we might be using another third party, the cutter manufacturer's plugins. They have plugins in different softwares or straight out different softwares all to begin with. And you may be using that as an option to prepare your cut data, send your cut data over to the device. And that's fine. What I'm going to show you today is setting up the cut information here in Onyx if you decide to use this information with the workflow for Onyx. So to get started, we need to do two things at the RIP level first, okay? The first thing is we need to make a quick set that has the cutter model identified. Secondly, we need to launch Cut Server, and in Cut Server, we need to add that complement of the cutter and set the communication to it. So we're going to start out with those two things here. First, I'm going to start with the quick set. So when we want to create a brand new quick set, we're going to select our printer, and up at the top, we're going to go to Configure Printer. And then, of course, you get the message that the server is going to shut down and we're going to go offline. So I'll say yes. And now my first tab is my Quick Sets tab. So here I'm going to say new, and in the field, in the middle left-hand side here, you kind of see lower left, middle left, you see this section, and this is all about cutting. So the information here is contour cutter selection. So I'm going to pick from none, our default is none, no cutter data. From this pull-down window, I would select my variety of different cutter manufacturers I'm working with. So I'll set a couple of different ones up, and we'll kind of explore some of the different settings in here. Over the versions, version changes, version updates in Onyx, this list has become a longer list. We support more devices, or cutter manufacturers are coming out with newer models. So over time, we are getting expanding this list and making updates. And also, over time, our version updates, we're at 19.0.3 right now, but over time, our version updates may also involve updates for the cutters. So different modifications, changes, support. Okay, so I'm going to start out by going in here and grabbing just a plain old Graphtec cutter model. And I'll give this a name that is going to let me understand that this is Graphtec cutter. Okay, so we always want to name our Kwikset something that's going to describe what it's doing. Okay, give me a second while I go ahead and mute a couple of you. One moment, everybody. Who else did I see? One moment. There we go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give that the appropriate name for the cutter model, Graphtec cutter. And now at this point, when I'm looking at the different settings below, use cutter path prefix. When we're talking about this cutter path prefix that's here, we are identifying the name of the actual spot color that's going to represent the cutter model, the cut data we're going to work with. Not the cutter model, but the cut data. So cutter path prefix is before. So as long as my spot color in the design file is going to have cut contour, begin with cut contour, if I name that spot color in my Illustrator file, cut contour trim, cut contour score, cut contour perf cut, or something to that effect, it's going to reference that data. Just because the beginning part of this word is here, it's going to reference that information and grab that information. So the information that we give here is going to directly relate to the spot color in Illustrator. Now, we have a little gear to the right, and in this gear, besides cut contour, we can activate a few other settings that we would also use. Maybe I use a score or a through cut. If I wanted to add my own, I can hit the plus symbol here, and maybe I wanted to add something like a die cut file. And sometimes people think in those terms. So anything we add in there, we're going to have that name come up as this variable. So the information comes up, we're getting this information based on our name of our spot color in Illustrator. All right, so I'm getting a question, a couple of different Graphtec models here. Yes, and it's true. You're going to see in a moment here when we go over to Cut Server how we're going to also add the appropriate model. So if I am working with an FC9000, I would select this model. If it's a FCX model, I'd grab that, or an Optima cutter. If it's just the older models, like maybe the 8600s, 8000s, 7000s, I can grab Graphtec cutter. In some cases, you may, in this case with the Graphtec, in some cases you may grab, maybe I grab Graphtec cutter and really I got the FC9000. It may still go through with the information, but you do want to grab the proper one, right? You do want to grab the exact model you're working with. You're going to see the same thing down below. If I scroll, you see there are several Mutos, several Roland styles, and so forth. Two or three flavors or more of some of these other choices. So yes, it's important that you do grab the proper one. If you're ever unsure of these types of things, and this is a good thing to point out, if you're ever unsure, is my setting a Graphtec cutter or an FC9000 or an FCX cutter or an Optima? If you're not sure based on the model, you can always put a phone call in or an email if you got time. Put either one in to support at Onyx. So you can phone the support number and talk to them and say which is the proper setting for my model, and they'll help you with that. Or you can email them at support@onyxgfx.com, GeorgeFrankXray.com, and support can get back to you on that as well. Another question came up in the chat field: when will shape-based nesting be available? Very soon. Very soon. I can only say that much. I'm hoping for it within the next, at the most, 2 months, probably 1 month. I'm not sure. I got to remember what they were kind of going over with some of these things. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited about that. It's going to be some really cool things that we're going to be able to do, which is the shape-based nesting. So, okay. So when it comes to the naming convention, use the cutter path prefix. The names we give this here are going to be the names of the spot color in Illustrator, which then we would either fill our object or stroke the object with that spot color name, score, through, cut contour, and it is case and space sensitive, so we do have to name it exactly the way we have it. So this is one thing that we have to kind of be careful about with getting the proper information over, and I'll kind of come back to that. So at any time we can go into this gear, we can remove items, we can add items in this list, we can set this up for how we want this to be. Okay. Now basically, essentially, right here, this information is really, at this point, ready to go as far as the quick set goes, basic parameters. There's one area, additional area I want to talk about, or actually say two areas, right below the cutter path prefix. I want to mention these two checkboxes here. Now these two checkboxes are very case-by-case specific, okay? It's not something that is going to be a general thing all the time. Okay, so when we look at these, let's talk about what these are doing, these settings. The first one we have here is going to be add the PDF trim box to cut paths. Okay, now first off, we have to be working with a PDF file. When we're working with a PDF file, the trim box of the PDF file will automatically be generated as a cut path. So this is something that, you know, we would do specifically if we needed to do this, like specifically to a file. And that would avoid us from having to create that cut path around the file, because this is just going to do this to the trim box. So in some cases, these little types of checkboxes and feature sets might fall into an area that you say, hey, that's absolutely perfect to what I want to do. So it'll go around, and maybe I've got a large print and I've got several 11 by 17s up, and on those 11 by 17s, inside that 11 by 17 trim box is going to be some shapes that are going to be cut. But then when the whole job is done, I'd like that whole 11 by 17 to have a cut associated to it. Automatically, if I check this box on and the file is a PDF, it will do that for you. You don't have to design anything in the file. So that's a very specific setting. Now the one below that, generate tile outline as a cut path. When you are tiling, okay, so you're going to tile something would represent your printer is a 30, in my case it's a 36-inch roll, and I'm printing a job that's, you know, 122 inches. Well, I need to tile this up into my 35.6 imageable area and slice this up to come up with the full 122 inches. Well, when we tile that job, there may be a little bit of outline shape that's there. That's just like nothing, surrounding media. We don't want that information to be there. If I turn on this checkbox, I'm able to generate the outline of the tile path automatically as a cut path. So when we look at the gear here to the right, in the gear settings, specific to the tile outline options, we can identify, are we going to associate that cut path to the original image, the bleed image, or the trim box? Okay. We also could choke that cut path a wee bit if we wanted to. We could include the label or the trim overlap if you are tiling with a trim with an overlap amount, then you want to trim that. And then we can associate what will the layer be, and there's all those preset names that we have, but what will the layer be identified as? We can also select that information. And the layer is going to be coming from Illustrator. When we create a layer that's going to have the specific name, like tile outline, for example, that's going to be the thing that's going to apply this cut to it, this cut shape to it. All right, so that's very specific to generate tile outline cut path. So these two bottom check boxes are very case-by-case specific. They're very unique. It just depends on what you are looking at and how, you know, what your needs are. Okay. Give me one moment to see. Send a message here. Okay. Right. So when it comes to these little presets, in some cases, it's just going to depend on what you're working with. Generally speaking, I've got my cutter set up for a GraphTech cutter model. I've got these cutter path prefixes, and now I'm going to click OK. Now I'll go back in and I'll make another one. And for this model, I'll come in here and I'll grab something different. Maybe in this case, I'll go through and I'll grab a, let's see, maybe a Zund cut center. So up at the top, I want to give this a name, very specific, and again, Zund cut center, just grabbing some different files, just to give you some different ideas in here. And again, I can go ahead and give my other naming conventions in here as well. That's something I can do. And I'll click OK. All right, so depending on how many different devices you have, as you're seeing me go through this list, you are going to identify them uniquely, okay? So this is something that's important because they are unique and they're going to have their own driver attributes for the marks that are going to print and so forth, and the spacing, all the controls are going to be in that cutter driver within Onyx software. All right, so I'm getting a request for Azuma. I'll go ahead and I'll make one up for there. Okay, I'm just going to go with those default presets and click OK. Okay, so now I've got a few different quick sets made. So this is the first thing we need to do is we need to make some quick sets that are going to be specific for that cutter model. Once we're done with that, I'll hit OK and close out of there. I'm next going to launch Cut Server software. And when I launch Cut Server software, for the first time, before you ever have added any other cutter models here, you're going to see this screen, which is telling us to go ahead and add a cutter. There's nothing added here automatically. Okay, so now this is where I'm going to match my cutters that I've added. So as we scroll down this list, this might be where you start seeing the more or less specific model. So I know I had a GraphTech selected. I'm just going to grab a 8600 and I'll click OK. Now when you do this for the first time and we see this information come up, let me go ahead and maximize my screen too, by the way. I always want to tell you guys live large, have everything, you know, full size. you'll notice it's added in the upper left or left-hand side column. Now there's a little gear here. This little gear is going to let me configure the cutter. That little gear is the same as if I clicked on Manage Cutters. So in this setting, I've got my communication. How am I going to talk to this cutter? So in the pull-down window, we are going to see options specific for that cutter model. And this is very much the case when we were talking yesterday about adding a printer driver and then communicating to the printer driver. Some printers are TCP/IP, some might be USB, some might be you're forwarding over to a folder, file to a folder on another hard drive. So all these different things come into play. You can see the options here. And again, TCP/IP, you click on the setup button, type in the IP address and hit test, and you should get a green light up here. I'm not connected, so I'm going to stay with the cut to file, kind of like I did yesterday when we were working with the printers. I'm not really connected to these devices. So if I click on cut to file, and I'll show you in the setup button where this goes. This is going to go to my Thrive 19 cutter folder. Inside the cutter folder, I'll have GraphTech, and I'll have one for my Summa and my Zund, all those models. Once I send the file over there, I'll see that. So just to hop up in the screen quickly here and show you, you can see I've got my Thrive 19. Here's my cutter folder, and my GraphTech cutter folder is already created just now, but I'll have content in there once I send files over. Okay, so when we look at the specifications for this GraphTech cutter model in Cut Server, these are the types of things we can do. We can set this to automatically forward cut files. As soon as the file comes into the queue here on the left, it's automatically going to go, if I had that checkbox on, it's automatically going to go to the GraphTech based on my communication type, which would be TCP/IP, serial, or USB relay to communicate, right? So maybe that's a little premature. I haven't gotten over there yet with my print to set this all up and get the cutter active. So maybe this time it's not an appropriate condition. However, if you're working with a flatbed cutter and there's a front-end computer controlling that cutter, yes, maybe I say automatically send those new cut files over to cut to file, cut to folder, and then this directory would be browsing to, across my network, to the other computer that takes care and handles the flatbed cutter, okay, the controllers, if you will. So that could very well be a good example. Now, if I've got more than one GraphTech cutter, someone mentioned that about the different cutter models, I could say filter the jobs in this FC8600 for this particular model. So specifically for this cutter, it's going to just keep the information coming in for that data. If I look at this cut job setting and I click on Add, this is going to show you for that GraphTech cutter its own independent mark detection settings, and then an action after cutting, return to origin and feed to the end of the job or perform a print. All right. So this is user 21 that just joined us. Trying to find you here on the list. Well, user 21. Gotcha. Just muted you. Okay, so whoever just logged in, call in user number 21. I muted you because you're getting excessive feedback. Okay. So depending on what we want to do with this particular model, if we're going to add this information as the data here for this filter type, that's when we can add this information, filtering the job for that cutter model. Maybe I got several different types of GraphTech cutters, and then I can identify how each one's going to have the mark detection and so forth. All right, I'm going to turn that off at the moment. I only have the one GraphTech. Now at the bottom, cut layer settings. When I show this part of the features to the people I'm training, when I show this, a lot of times they say thank you but no thank you to this part, so let's talk about this. When I say add, I would be able to identify a cut status, if you will. So maybe this is going to be my cut contour trim. And so I can say use the cutter settings, or my cut contour trim, let's pretend, is condition 2. Or I can individually set these conditions up here for speed, force, and acceleration. So I can add this in here, cut contour trim, and then I can add another one in here, and I'll call this cut contour score. And again, maybe that's condition, 3 or 5 or what have you. Okay, so the idea is this, how this works down here. We set the condition up in Cut Server for this GraphTech cutter. When I bring my file over and it comes into the Cut Server software, I can select the different cut paths and tell it, you are going to be a trim or you are going to be a score. And what is that telling it really? Well, it's telling it what condition to use on the cutter, what's going to be the blade setting and so forth. When I show this, most cases I show this to my on-site training or my customers, a lot of times they're saying, that's nice, but I don't want the operator to get complacent and just assume that this condition 2 for trim is still good. We want them to take the head of the cutter and let it cut with the blade in an inconspicuous area and test it that that is still good, okay? So this is the thing where you may decide you don't want to do this here. You're going to do this manually at the cutter and tell it what condition it should be, okay? So that's something that's, a give or take. You can do this or not do this if you like to. So I'm going to have them here because one of my sample files has a couple of different cut paths, and I'll show you how this is going to work. Okay, so that's just my GraphTech FC8600 being added. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And again, we added that, hit the configure button, configure cutter. Now I got 2 others to add. I got my Zund and my Summa. So I'm going to go up here to manage cutters at the very top. And here I'm going to say add cutter. And this is what we saw in the very beginning when we launched Cut Server for the first time. Now I'm just kind of calling this back up again to add my other models. So I said a Summa S-Class, I think is what I grabbed. So I'm just going to grab this right here and click OK. Now I can select it and configure here. And this is what I get for the Summa S series. Okay, so I've got a TCP/IP, a serial cable, cut the folder, or I have the Summa USB going directly to the device. I'm going to leave this on the cut the folder, and again, clicking on setup, it's going to browse right to that directory. Similar settings is what we have here, enable role server, so again, if you're working with that part of the table, or add, and now you'll see, specific to the Summa, we don't have conditions like in GraphTech. GraphTech's conditions are going to be saying whatever we tell the touch panel on the cutter to what it should do, okay? So here with the Summa, we now have these presets. Is it a drag knife? Am I using a ballpoint pen in there? Is it going to be, a pounce cut or a flex cut? These different settings in here, okay? So depending on what we're doing, and again, override the device velocity settings, and you can change that here. Override the pressure, and you can change that here. Optional settings, everybody, optional. But this is where I can say, yep, you know what, for cut contour score, I'm going to have it, or not score, I'm going to have trim, and I'll have that set for drag knife. Okay. So again, as you can see, we've got different conditions in here. And maybe I have my cut contour score as this. Okay. Now, I will tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you guys, of course, always saying where I'm coming from. All of these different cutter models, okay, I haven't been formally trained on all of them to tell you, like, what does a drag knife do compared to a flex cut. That's going to come from your cutter manufacturer specifically giving you that training. Okay, I'm just pointing out some of these things, and some of you probably are already knowledgeable about these different conditions with the cutters and settings, so you know what these presets are related to. All right, now I'm going to add one more, and that was going to be for my cut center. Okay, I'll select that and configure, and now here's our options. Cut the file, I'm going to leave it there for me. I've got this for TCP/IP or folder. So this is a TCP/IP communicating device, and this has Zunt has their own software utility where you can pull in the information. Now I'm not connected, so I can't launch this material match and get the information, the specs. I don't have any of that capability, but just to say this is where you would be able to do that. Different materials might require, or well, definitely will require different types of cut parameters and settings, right? You're going to have certain blade depth and speed and so on and so forth. This is what we get when we say add a new job cutter setting. So we could actually tell this that this is going to be cut contour KISS cut, and then I can select KISS, and I could add another one. So again, this is very case and space sensitive, and I can say through cut and pick my through cut. Okay, so just depending on what you're working with. All right, now close that out. And so I've got managed cutters. I've got my 3 different cutter models added in Cut Server, the landing point of the cut data. In my RIP, I've got my 3 different quick sets, so they will rip a file accordingly for those cutter models. Okay, now let's run through a scenario with this. Those are the 2 things I needed to do. When I want to bring in a file on my training folder, I want to show you this. In the Thrive 19 samples folder, there's a folder here called Cutting, and we give you this cut contour sample and then a cut only workflow. We still got to talk about that. In the cut contour sample, I want to show you in here, move this guy aside here, that everything in magenta that you see is associating for a cut spot color. And at the bottom, we've got these 2 little blue tabs down here. They also have a cut parameter to them. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into my print production, and I'm going to look at my ink manager. And if I look at this, I can say, oh yeah, they designed as a magenta color cut contour 1. Remember, it's a prefix. If I use this with my GraphTech or my Summa or my Zunt, I'm going to be referencing cut contour in those quick sets. This spot color will be seen as something special, and it will not print. If I use that proper quick set, it's going to have a cutter model active, and the name in the cut path is cut contour. As soon as it sees that beginning name, it stops and grabs this data, magenta shape. You are going to the cutter. Same thing for the little guy at the bottom here, cut contour 2 space 1, which is like 3, and then cut contour 2. This file is in our samples folder. It's prepared for cut data with our default cut contour. Okay, I just want to point that out to you. Let me get rid of that, and I'll go into the RIP again, and we're going to bring that file in. So I'm going to go to my samples folder, cutting, whoop, it's the wrong folder, got my cursor, cutting, and I'm going to select this once, and then pick the appropriate quick set. So I want to grab, for example, I'll go with my GraphTech cutter. I'm not going to open a job editor, but I'm going to bring this in. Okay. So the information's coming in. All right, now, as we look at this, it's ripping the file. Depending on the cutter model type that you are working with, if it's a flatbed cutter, you can control where this file is going to print or position on your flatbed material, right, from your 00 point, your location. If it's not a flatbed printer and or cutter, pardon me, cutter, it's going to be a cutter model like the GraphTech where it feeds that sheet around. It might be helpful if we set up our printing parameters here in our placement strategy. It might be helpful if we take this information, oh, I'm getting a little lock up here. Hang on, everybody. We might be going for a little ride. I think things are getting a little overheated here. Okay. I might want to say, I'm going to center my work. And I also might want to give this 3 inches or whatever the cutter manufacturer recommends of extra space. Okay. So this is the settings. Let me turn on my best fit allow rotate. Okay, bing, there we go. So I've got 3 extra inches at the lead edge and the tail edge. So when this prints, I have 3 inches of non-printing area, extra media space. My work is centered and auto-rotated. And now when I feed this in my Graphtec cutter, my tabletop cutter, if you will, it's going to move and move and move and go through there. And because I have enough lead edge and tail edge, this sheet of data that's printed will not just fall off the cutter, right? When it starts to cut at the very edges here, there's enough material to grip under the rollers. That's the concept of giving it a little extra space. If you're working with a flatbed, it might not matter, right? Because you're on a vacuum frame, you tell it the 0-point location, you locate your marks, and it starts cutting, so it's no big deal. Okay. What we see in the RIP-Q right now is normal. I do not see my cutter color. I do not see my cutter marks or my arrow for direction, feed direction, or barcode. This is normal. And I know it gets a lot of people excited. They want to see the cut information. We hear it. We understand. So it's just right now our previews are what's going to print. In my list here of my file, you can see under cutter right here, it says Graphtec cutter. So if I double-click this file anywhere on this line of the data here, anywhere at all, just double-click or right-click and go to Job Properties. I can also confirm Contour Cutter selected, Graphtec. And if I needed to, I could change that, but that's proper. And over on the right, you get a preview of your cutter path outline in magenta. This preview is there. Now, if you ever say, hey, I'm not seeing my preview, why am I not seeing my magenta preview when I double-click the file and go to Job Properties? It could be that that feature has been turned off on your computer. So let me show you where that's at. File, General Settings, and right here in the lower right corner, Display Cut Path Preview and Image Preview. All right, Display Cut Path Preview and Image Preview. Just 2 settings above that is another condition here that might be helpful, Display No Cut Data dialog. So if I'm ever sending a file over that contains, there is no spot color for cut data, but I'm grabbing my Graphtec QuickSet or my Zun QuickSet or my Suma. Those are cutter QuickSet. My file doesn't contain a cut file. It will give me a message, do you want to continue? This file contains no cut data. So File General Settings, 2 little checkboxes here that relate to cutting. Okay, at this point, I'm ready to send my information over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Cut Server to show you. My Graphtec cutter is blank. There's no data here yet. As soon as I say Print Now, and this file sends to my printer, and that takes some time. The printer warms up or does its things, whatever it's doing and getting ready, and then it starts to print. It takes some time, right? But while I say Print Now, in my cut data, Graphtec cutter plan here in my Cut Server, you will immediately see the cut contour sample. In the upper left corner, you see the barcode. Barcode is alphanumeric randomly generated. We can't control how that is set up. It's just automatically randomly generated. We can see the size, the media that I chose, and the date. So we do get more information. As the versions went along in Onyx, we made updates to our Cut Server to give more information here and populate this data. Now, if I select this file, you will see the information as it relates to my cut path. And I can hover over these areas, and I can see the different cut paths. Now, over on the far right side, you're going to notice that I have these different layers. And remember, we looked at this in Acrobat a moment ago and looked at the PDF. I had a spot color. It was on its own layer, cut contour 1. If I hover over that object, it shows me in green. And then here's layer 2-1, and here's 2. So at the bottom, these two little shapes here have their own cut data. If I had set up, going back to the gear, if I set this up at the bottom, cut layer settings for cut contour trim and score, I now can say this file should be my light score, and these two files should be my hard trim. And the order is important. First, I want to go around and do all my light scores, light kiss cuts, if you will, and then secondly and third, go through and do the hard through cuts. If for whatever reason these were not in order, you can select, and at the bottom, you'll notice we have a move a layer up, move a layer down command, okay? All right, so when we look at these different things and we think about, okay, well, what can I do with the file? This cut information, there's not a whole lot that you can do to the file itself, okay? When I make these changes, it's going to ask me if I want to save my changes. Yes. So when you're transitioning, it's going to show you that. If I right-click over the file, it's enabled for cutting, but maybe this shape shouldn't be here. I can turn that off, and now that shape is not going to cut. It's not enabled for cutting. I'll go back in, enable for cutting. Or maybe I want to right-click and out delete that altogether, get rid of that path altogether, or move it to a different layer. But this is all, everybody. This is all you can do. We're not being able to, like, edit a line, a cut line. For any of that, we have to go back to Illustrator. Okay. So basic workflow, bringing this into the RIP, open, bring the file, pick the proper quick set, and then when we say print now, upon printing the file, the cut information is sent over to Cut Server. And we can associate these different bits of data here if you wanted to. You don't have to, but if you wanted to. Okay, back in the RIP queue. File Manage Cutters. In File Manage Cutters, we can see some specific preferences, configuration to the cutter model. You know I picked GraphTech Cutter. I'm going to hit Configure. In the GraphTech Cutter, we can print the Onyx barcode, control the mark length, pick the pattern of what type of marks are going to print. The mark X margin and Y margin these are all preset from the driver, but you can change them. And there might be a limit on how low you can go, okay, because everything's preset for the manufacturer, so there's an idea behind it. The mark X and Y margin is the edge of the sheet to the edge of the mark. And then the image X and Y margin is the edge of the sheet to where the image is. So basically, we're controlling the space between the mark and the image right here. Questions coming in, very good question. Can the name of the job be printed along with the barcode numbers? Well, right now, the job name isn't in the barcode, but if you turn on labels in your quick set, the name of the job would be in the label. And you could turn off other features in the label to just have only the job name if that's what you're interested in. So right now, it's a good question. It's not part of the barcode, but it would be part of the label, general label in the quick set. So good question. So I can control my repeat interval, how often do I want these marks to repeat, and then the thickness of the mark. So this is just the setting for the GraphTech. All right, let's take a look at the other choices we had in here. So again, SUMA S-Class series and configure, okay, what type of barcode, a SUMA or an Onyx or no barcode. The mark size, there's those margins again, and your repeat interval. Okay, and then cut center, configure. This gives you more information, especially when you're working with that materials list. Now, I don't have this ZCC utility. I'm not connected to the device, so I can't get that information in here, but this information would populate. So with this information down here, cut data submission to Zun Direct or to Cut Server. That's your options as well. So you can pick and choose how you want this information to be submitted. Kind of bypass the cut server in Onyx and go right to the Zund, or out and out use the cut server software, and then from there we'll send it. Everything here just depends on what it is you want this to do, you know, for your particular needs. Okay, so that's manage cutters, file manage cutters. People have asked me, hey, can I control like where my mark goes? Well, all we really have is mark X and Y, edge of the sheet, edge of the mark, image X and Y, edge of the sheet where the image starts. You really can't control, and then interval amounts. You really can't control other settings. These are the presets we get based on the manufacturer. Okay, so let's take a look at Illustrator and talk about file preparation, and then I want to talk about a cut-only scenario, and then we'll wrap up our day, our session for this. So here I am in Illustrator. These 4 cyan shapes are going to be shapes that are going to print and cut. Okay, so what I need to do when I'm working with my data in Illustrator or any other vector program, I need to make a new swatch color. So new swatch, and this is very, very, very important. The swatch needs to be named whatever the name was back in our quick set. So I'm going to hop back in here quickly, edit quick set. These names here, am I making a spot color called cut contour or through or score? The name here in the use cutter path prefix is going to be the spot color name that I'm going to identify in my program like Illustrator. Very important. That's where the name comes from. Close all that out, go back into my Illustrator. As soon as I can find it with my eyes, here you are. Okay, so now I'll say, okay, this is going to be, cut, contour. Second part that is very, very important, it has to be a spot color. Has to be a spot color. Can't be process. If it's process color, or if the name does not match the name in the quick set, that color object for the cutter will print. Okay? So that's important. Now I'm going to color it any old color. It doesn't really matter because it's just a display. Okay. So there's my data. Cut, contour. The next thing I need to do is identify where the shape's going to be for the spot color. Where's the cut path going to be? Well, I've got a couple of different options. I could stroke the file with the cut contour spot color, or I could copy it, paste in place, and fill it with the spot color. So I'll show you both ways, right? I'll take the star, and I'm going to stroke it with cut contour. It does not need to be a large cut. Could be a quarter point. And we might want to be mindful of aligning it on center, inside, or outside. And that's that. Now, I don't really care for that too much for 2 reasons. One reason, I don't see it right now with this zoom to fit on screen window. So I don't really, I can't see this information, visually. The second thing is, it would be nice to take the outline shape or wherever our cut data is and isolate it on its own new layer and treat it separately on its own layer. So, and that's going to revert back to cut server with these layers here, okay? That's coming from Illustrator. All right, so I'm going to take that stroke information off, all right? And then I'm going to show you the other method. And you can work either way you like to work. You can put a stroke on the file of the cut contour color, quarter point, align the stroke direction, that's fine. Or you can select all your shapes, edit copy, edit paste in place. To my knowledge, I've never found a duplicate command. Then I would take those top shapes again, and I would fill them with cut contour. So now I can show you that is a duplicate on top, right in the same place, copy, paste in place, filled with the cut contour color. Over in my layers palette, I can now make a new layer. I can call this cut contour, If you see this little display color, how's the display color going to be? Red, blue, and so on. If you're that much of a stickler, you can even add a green. I colored this as green. You don't have to, but you could, right? We're all kind of got our little funny ways. And I can move that there. And now I can hide that entire cut contour layer and see the work that's going to print. Okay? So this is just allowing us to kind of organize it, right? Layers and organize and stuff like that. Okay, now, another tip is if we select all of that cut contour shape, we can tell it to overprint fill. So I've got my attributes window open here, overprint fill. You don't have to tell it to overprint. It's not necessary for it to work. This stuff will work without it being overprinted. But if you do have overprint fill on, and then remember in Acrobat and in Illustrator, overprints are not automatically set to preview. This could be a zinger, so you want to be careful. If I say view and I go to overprint preview, I now could see my overprinting objects. And now if I take this top shape and move it, you can see the combined color where it overprints. You don't have to have it overprint. If you do have it overprint, it may be more detectable by your eye, and you say, wow, what is that dark green color? Oh, that's right. That's my contour object on top. Okay. You don't necessarily have to have it overprint, but it might help for display purposes to enlighten you visually. Okay. So now I'm going to save this file. So I'll do a save as, and I'll just call it cut shapes. Prepared. Okay, so I know that's my file. Basic settings in here for my EPS. Okay, now back in my RIP software, I'm going to open and I'm going to go to that particular folder. And I think I did it to myself again. Where did I save that? Wouldn't be the first time. Save as. So I'm going to go to Thrive, Training Files. I think that's where, sample files rather. Samples. Ah, that's right. I put them in my images and my cutting. That's where it's at. Okay, never mind. Knowing where it's at is half the battle, right? That's my default file. I got to go to my training images, cutting, prepared, pick the particular model we're working with. This time I'll grab the Summa and I'll bring that in. All right, very good. So again, double-click the file. You can see our Summa cutter and the magenta outline just for what it's worth. When I send this print now and I go over to my cutter, in my Summa, I'll have my file appear. I select that. I was making changes to the previous file with these layers. Do I want to save that? Yes or no? And now here's my data. And again, if I had those alternative options here, I can select that for how I want that cut condition to be applied. All right, so I want to go over one more thing with you guys. I'm going to take that prepared file and drag it back up again. Let's say I have this set for 4 copies. Okay. If you tell an object to do multiple copies, and then you print this, printing it fresh again, it is going to generate another cut file here. And there's my 4 copies. So keep this in mind. The cut information is going to be negotiated with the file itself. Okay, 2 more things to talk about. We got 4 minutes left. If we go to our placement strategy, and I click on my gear, in the Options tab for all of our placement strategies, we have this feature, Generate Nest Outline Cut Path. Now, as I hover, you get the little echo. When set, when checked on, it's going to create a trim box around the entire image nest. So this could be very helpful. In this case, it's going to go through and around that nested area, it's going to create a big cut area, which would be helpful in aiding someone who's doing weed bordering, okay? So that type of a situation is going to help you with doing that weed bordering. So if I go back in, and I'm going to bring in my cut contour sample. I think I've got that turned on now. Yes, I do. Okay. I'll bring this information in. And now I'll say print now. And if I go back into my cutter, here's my cut contour. See that outer box? That's going to be my active nesting, cutting for nesting option. If I click on the one from before, this is the one I did earlier in GraphTex. See how there is no outside box? But in my cut contour, it added that box on the very outside. That is because this time around, I sent that with Generate Nest Outline Cut Path. When that is checked on, you get this outer box, which could help you for weed bordering. That's going to be a separate cut path. And then we could easily peel that all away and roll that up and get rid of that. So, okay, very good. So one more thing to talk about here, and I want to make reference to some documentation. First off, our contour cut paper, it's in my Onyx. I'm going to email you guys all this information as well for convenience. I'm kind of pulling through all the emails that Corey's been sending you, the invites. I'm trying to glean all your emails from there and send them to you, so I'm working on it. But this will show you the page. The pages talks about designing your cut file, what to do. It's going to talk about setting that color up, and having it on a separate layer. And then it also talks a bit about the manage cutter settings as well. Okay. We also have a paper on cut only. So in some cases, you have a need to not print and cut, but just cut. You take your colorful vinyl material, you load it onto your cutter. What's the data? What's going to send to it? How do I get that information over? When I print, with printing and cutting, and I print a file, the cut information goes over to the cutter, but I don't want to print anything. I have nothing to print. So what you're going to do, and this came out in version 11.1, you are going to create your shape using the pen tool, path, make your path, save this out as an SVG, Scalable Vector Graphics, and these are the instructions they talk about on this white paper. And then what you're going to do is in Cut Server, you're simply going to go to Open and bring in that data. So I'm going to go and do this for you guys now. And I'm going to say Open. I'm going to browse to my C drive, to Thrive 19. I'm going to go into my samples folder. It's in the cutting folder, by the way, cut only, SVG. I would pick, very important, I'd pick which cutter model I want to go to. And then when I hit Open, it's going to convert that file in, and now I see my cut only. This cut only sample file is just this big frog with the little Onyx bar in there. So again, all this was a cut path, or a path that was made in Illustrator with the pen tool, right? Make a path, save it as an SVG. What can I do to this file? Well, if this was just a cut only file, literally it might be a bunch of text that you're going to put to a glass window or a glass door or something, and it's going to be the name of the business or what have you, right? So you're really not going to be doing much but taking it as it is and sending it over to your cutter. But you do have choices. You can rotate, set your mark detection, which there is no mark detection on this. It's just cut only. You can mirror it, scale it, and you can tell it number of copies. Okay. So in this case, you're just able to go through and do this and get this information to come across. Okay, and again, you got your cut preferences as well if you're working with that type of data. I made changes here. If I click on a different file anywhere in my directory list, it's going to ask me, before it changes to that file, it's going to ask me, the cut file was changed, would you like to save changes? I'm going to say no, and that's going to keep that cut only as a one-up. So just to say, depending on what you do, you can save this or not. So with cut-only information, there is no printing. You're getting this all ready, how you want this to be, and at the bottom you're saying cut now. Now what is the magic to getting this frog to be just where I want it to be on my sheet? Well, you're going to take your vinyl material, load it onto your cutter. In this case, it's a Graphtec. So you're going to position it where there's enough material overhanging the back end, and then kind of, put it under pinch rollers and such. And then when you tell this to cut now, at the very bottom, cut now, that sends this data over to the cutter, and it's going to sense the two edges of the media, and it knows to center it within there. So the work is going to happen in that sense. If it's a flatbed cutter, it's a little bit different, only because of the fact that you can tell it the coordinates where you want that to start, and it'll go through and do the cutting. So that's your cut-only workflow. All right, that's everything about cutting. One more thing to mention is if you did have more than one cut path, I've got a cut shape. It's going to be exactly to the same size of my artwork file, but then do my copy, paste in place. I also have another object that is going to be a little bit larger. Now just give me a second here. I'm kind of guesstimating this to go a little bit larger. All right, let's see here. Just really quickly, trying to be quick. Okay, so now these shapes, okay, those I can have on their own layer, and I can make another new swatch, and this could be cut, contour, trim. Definitely going to be a spot color, and I'll just make it, some other kind of color. Now when I select these shapes that are the much larger ones I created, and I fill them with that other spot color, cut, contour, trim, and then what I could do is move them to their own layer. And this layer could be called, oh, there you go. Second here, cut, contour, trim. Again, whatever color. Okay. And then I could take those objects and move them to that layer. Okay, all right. So again, I can have all of these different objects and these different shapes appear. I've got one that's larger than the normal file that's going to cut, one that is exactly to the cut shape, and then the object that's going to actually print. So if you've got multiple cut paths, you can make multiple spot colors. Just be aware of the naming convention. You want to be able to keep this naming convention proper, again, to what we have identified in the quick set for that cutter model. Okay? Okay, so that's our class. It's 5 minutes after the hour. Let me stop sharing my screen, and you guys can have control of your computers again. And I don't know if you have any other questions. Let me look at the chat fields here. It looks like, okay, good. Someone had a question about the fonts. And yes, you can always create outlines or add the font library. Yes, I'm going to be, these videos are being recorded, and once I render them down and I got to go through and review them, I will be saving them out and emailing them to you all. Please be patient. I'm trying to get that done while I'm getting everything else going on. It's been a fairly busy week, but I'm working on it. Stay tuned. Our next session today is at 1 o'clock, and we're going to be talking about color management from input file to the RIP control. So what are we doing in Photoshop and Illustrator with color management, embedding profiles, and how it relates to Onyx and what's going to take place with the conversion. Okay, so I'll let you guys get logged off here. We'll get logged on for that meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we'll see you soon on another call.